All right, ladies and gentlemen, UFC 307 is in the books, and I have a very special guest, a man that hasn't been on the program now for some particular amount of time, and I'm honored to have him back on here after a big night in the office. Aaron Bronsteter is joining me on Submission Radio to react to the pay-per-view that just went down. Aaron, you look a little bit like an anime character, but I appreciate you joining me, man.
Yeah, I don't know what's up with this camera filter, but yeah, I mean, hey, it's at least tidied me up a little bit. You don't have to get to see all my wrinkles and all the other stuff that I have going on. But thanks for having me on. It has been a minute, Dennis. I'm always happy to do the show with you.
Dude, so before we get into Alex's KO win and his performance today, rate UFC 307 for me, Aaron, as an event. Like, where does it rank for you? Because it was highly criticized by a lot of people as sort of one of the more average UFC offerings in a pay-per-view for quite some time.
Yeah, like I think on paper it was better than what we ended up getting tonight, which happens from time to time. Like I think the main event kind of over delivered. I think people had high expectations for it, and I think it actually ended up being better than people expected, if you can believe that, because I thought that was kind of a tailor-made main event to like excite the fans. That's what made it great. And I thought the co-main event was actually pretty good. Like it was a competitive fight, and I think that a lot of people kind of gave that fight some flack. But the way that the Jose Aldo fight ended, I don't think that was necessarily great. I think a lot of people were left with a bad taste in their mouth after that fight. Kayla Harris, I think people expected to be a little bit more dominant as an 11-1 favorite, but she still ends up getting it done. The Kevin Holland fight ended prematurely because he got injured. So it's like there were like things along the way that made the card not as good as perhaps I think it could have been. Again, on paper, I thought there was a pretty solid main card overall. It's not like an MSG card or like an Abu Dhabi card, but for a card in Salt Lake City, I think that it ended up being a really, having Alex Pereira as the headliner was actually quite good.
Because a lot of people are saying, right, like too many UFC cards, the product is being watered down a little bit. Like I've got a lot of friends who are not watching the product as much because there's too many cards and they kind of felt a little bit disenchanted by some of the experiences they've had watching some of the, more average offerings. Where do you sit on this? Are you a fan of having more cards and a little bit more watered down, or do you want to see a little bit more quality to the cards in the future? Do you think it hurts the product?
I'm like in the minority here. Like I like having a lot of cards. For me, like I don't care if a card on paper isn't that good. Like I get excited every week for Saturday nights. And I like breaking down the fights beforehand and looking at them and trying to figure out how they're going to go. And that's just me, though. Like I think that you could maybe draw a more casual demographic if you're doing less cards. Like I think if you look back at like the Chuck Liddell days when the sport was really breaking through, there was 1-2 events per month, maybe. Right? This was before even fight nights, I think, started to happen with any sort of regularity. So I understand that, but I think that's kind of a romanticism of what the UFC used to be versus what it is now. And I think that like I love the fights. For me, Saturday nights is like the thing that I look forward to all week. And then when the fights come, regardless of what they are on paper, I just love watching. I love watching the sport as a whole. So like you're not always going to get the highest level fights necessarily, but I still think you're getting an entertaining product week in and week out.
All right, well, let's talk about an entertaining product in Alex Pereira. He had a pretty epic fight, man, with Khalil Roundtree. You were there live. Break this down for me, man. Like, did it live up to the expectation that you had? Because some people out here, like the Chael Sonnens of the world, go, hey, Khalil can actually get this done. He might beat Alex. Where were you sitting on how this fight was going to play out? And were you surprised by anything that you saw from there? Because, man, Khalil had some success. He was able to have some good rounds in there against Alex.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised by how well Khalil Roundtree performed in this fight. I wasn't, as a matter of fact, as Chael Sonnen was going out on a limb and saying that Roundtree was going to win. Although I do put out picks every week for cards, and my dart throw was that Roundtree would get a KO. And I mean, there were times where he was certainly threatening, and I thought that he won those first 2 rounds, which is probably more than I guess the average person would have expected. I think a lot of people thought that Poatan was going to knock him out early, that it wasn't going to be that competitive of a fight. I mean, I thought that it was a very competitive fight and that Alex Pereira was building and building and building to a point where he was just able to pick Khalil Roundtree apart. But early on in that fight, Khalil Roundtree was certainly a threat and was making Alex Pereira kind of second guess himself, I think, in the first round. And then Pereira started to take a little bit more of a conservative game plan, was landing the leg kicks and starting to build upon that. And then once he saw that Khalil Roundtree was kind of a wounded animal and he wasn't throwing with the same sort of zip as he was earlier. And it was harder for him to put weight on his leg in order to generate that kind of power. That's when I think Alex started to pounce, and we saw what happened in that fourth round. And I thought it was an incredible fight. Like, I think it really lived up to what my expectations were, which was that it was going to be like almost like a great kickboxing fight with 4-ounce gloves, like just a striker's delight. And I think that's what it ended up being.
Do you think Alex Pereira is notching himself a case here for Fighter of the Year? I mean, he's kind of been the go-to guy for the UFC, right? He's someone that the UFC can go to save a card. He definitely did that here at 307. And not only that, but he had an absolute war with Khalil and was able to come out victorious. Where does he sit for you in that discussion for the Fighter of the Year after this performance and being able to carry another card?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it's like, if not him, then who? I think the only two people that I think you could really strongly consider are Alex Pereira and Diego Lopez. Like, I think Diego Lopez has had himself a year, right? So I think that's probably the other person that I would look at if I'm looking at Fighter of the Year. I don't have everybody in front of me. Like, if you want to throw some more candidates at me, feel free. But I think that those are two that really stand out as having Fighter of the Year credentials so far.
Yeah, that's right. And throw your Fighter of the Year ideas in the comment section below. We'll have a look at them. I'll go to some fan questions here. First off, Craig5835 has a question about Alex. Will he go to heavyweight or does he want Dricus? I saw in the press conference, he mentioned that he doesn't want Dricus next, but he might go to heavyweight. He might stay at 205. What do you think the future holds for him?
Yeah, like you said, at the press conference, he said, Sean Strickland's the guy that I'm training with right now. I don't want to get in his way at middleweight. So, and when I see Alex Pereira, I think to myself, how did this guy ever make middleweight? But that said, he's like with Yusri Belgauri in his corner, and Yusri's like 6'5" and makes middleweight. But I mean, I think that basically, if Ankalaev ends up beating Rakic, I think Pereira's next fight is Ankalaev. But I also think that if Jones and or Stipe retire in November, which is likely, like, really, what else is out there for Tom Aspinall? And I think if you do Tom Aspinall versus Alex Pereira, I put this out there tonight, and people are like, oh, that's such a lopsided fight, and Pereira's got no chance. I'm thinking, like, Alex Pereira with 4-ounce gloves against anybody, to say he has no chance means you're just not paying attention, right? Like, this guy has devastating power, and he would have the designation of becoming the UFC's first 3-division champion. Like, I think that there's a lot of promotional weight to that. So, I just don't see anybody right now that can challenge Tom Aspinall, but he hasn't really already fought. I mean, maybe Cyril Gahn if he beats Volkov, but like, Aspinall's kind of almost cleaned up the division already, as crazy as it is to say, if you don't put Jones and Stipe into the equation.
Another question here. Can Ankalaev do it? What do you think? Obviously, Ankalaev has his own fight that he's got to win before he gets this fight with Alex, but what do you think? Do you think he's the man to beat Alex Pereira here?
I think his skill set will give Alex Pereira difficulty, and the odds are out. And Ankalaev was earlier tonight minus 140 favorite against Pereira. So Pereira's actually an underdog in that fight. Personally, I think Pereira beats Ankalaev. I think that he's got too many weapons that he can threaten Ankalaev with. And I also think that Ankalaev's wrestling, while it is great, it's almost been a little bit overstated as to how good it is. And he hasn't used it as much in recent fights. So I want to see how he looks against Rakic. If he beats Rakic, I think that that's the fight to make. In fact, you could argue that it was a fight to make for tonight if you're looking at the rankings and you're looking at the meritocracy side of things. But I also understand from a promotional standpoint, like, putting two great strikers against each other is never going to do bad business.
Yeah, like, for me, it feels like the UFC is trying to kind of maximize Alex Pereira's potential while he's still in the company, trying to get as many fights in as possible. If he goes in there, right, and Ankalaev does beat him, like, let's say it goes really in a lopsided way to Ankalaev for whatever reason, how much do you think that hurts someone like Alex Pereira? Because to me, in a way, he's almost like an Israel Adesanya, where you can kind of put him on any card. And I feel like he's at a point now where, fans just want to see him fight. But how much do you think that could hurt him if he loses against Ankalaev, for example, next?
At this point in time, he's 38 years old, right? He's really playing with house money. He has more title fights than he does actual MMA fights, I think. Like, if you take the totality of his MMA career, I think the majority of his fights have been title fights over the course of his entire career. Like, what this guy's managed to do in the last 3 years or whatever it is just otherworldly. It's one of the greatest runs I've ever seen in MMA. So if Ankalaev beats him, like, I certainly don't know that it would diminish his legacy that much. Still 2-division champion, putting guys away in spectacular fashion, fighting frequently. So, I mean, obviously it'll hurt his stock. I mean, losing will never make your stock rise. But imagine what a win over Ankalaev would do for him, given that everybody keeps saying that they're not matching him up against good grapplers, right? Like I think Jan Błachowicz is probably the best grappler that he's been matched up against so far. And I think Ankalaev is much better in that department, as you could probably see from the matchup that those two guys had against each other a couple years back.
We got a question here. Do you feel like Alex is the current face of the UFC? What do you think?
I mean, with Sean O'Malley losing, you can certainly make that case. But I still think kind of Conor McGregor, as long as he's still like out there, is sort of the face of the UFC, at least their biggest box office draw. But with the regularity that Alex Pereira is fighting with right now, I think you can certainly make the case that maybe he is the face of the UFC right now. People love watching him fight. The fan following that he continues to build is just like tremendous for a guy that doesn't speak any English. Like just with the stone head and like the merchandise he's selling and Chama, he's found a way to endear himself to the fans, even though he doesn't speak a whole lot of English. That kind of reminds me of Anderson Silva back in the day before he started to speak English with regularity. That fans just loved watching him fight, and he became a fan favorite just based on that.
All right, let's talk about Juliana Pena's win over Raquel Pennington, man. First of all, what was your reaction to the fight? How did you have it scored? And what was your reaction when you saw Pena was able to get it done?
I had a 48-47 Pennington. I had Pennington winning the first round, the fourth round, and the fifth round, and I had Pena winning 2 and 3. But at the same time, like I was on social media and I saw a lot of people crying robbery about this one. It's like, this was a close fight. Like I thought rounds 1 and 5 were fairly competitive. All 3 judges gave Rocky the fifth. But the first round was the swing round, and that was a really close round where they were really feeling each other out. And 2 of the judges gave it to Pena, and that's what ultimately made her the champion tonight, right? Like that a mostly uneventful round in the first, where I thought that Pennington was landing the more crisp shots, but at the same time, I knew that was a close round. So you can't really cry robbery over something like that. Like it's a close fight with competitive rounds, with 3 rounds that are pretty easy. You got 2 and 3 for Pena, 4 for Pennington, which you got the knockdown, and then 1 and 5, I think. We have to remember when the judges are watching this fight, they're not watching it in the same way as us. Like we're watching it on TV. A lot of people have friends around or people around them. We're getting to see all these different angles of the fight. Judges see it from one specific vantage point. There's 3 of them. They're sitting at 3 different parts of the cage. And when you're watching a fight like that, it's very different from how people consume it on television. I think people fail to recognize that for whatever reason. So when you have a round like the first round where there isn't really a singular big moment for either fighter, I think that it's basically what the judge is seeing from that vantage point that can really sway how they score that round. And I think giving Pena that first round is like, I have no problem with it. So I think Juliana Pena being the new champion, even though if you go to MMA decisions and every media member has a 48-47 for Pennington, like every media member is also watching it in the same way with the TV angles. They're not seeing it from the same way as the judges are from where they're seated. And those are the scorecards that count, right? So like, I can't get upset over a fight that is decided over a pretty uneventful first round.
But this is the thing, right? Like Luke Thomas came on the show when we did the preview show and spoke about the fact that it kind of feels like the women's bantamweight division is in a bit of a decline. And I guess we're not really talking about from the skills perspective, but from the interest perspective. Like going into this fight, a lot of fans were like, well, Juliana Pena is coming off a loss. She hasn't fought since 2022. Why is she getting this opportunity against Raquel? And of course, there was a great sort of reasoning for that as well. It made a lot of sense to have her in there. She was great for sort of the press conference and to get some trash talk going. But now her winning the title like this, it kind of doesn't feel like it does a lot for the division, right? Like people already aren't the highest on it. Now you've got a lot of people saying they don't really feel like Penny is the champion. Do you think it hurts things any more than it was before this fight even happened?
Why don't I flip that on you and just say, if Raquel Pennington won tonight, do you think that does anything for the division? That this win, like, I mean, be honest, would that have made for a better like situation for the division if Pennington wins a 48-47 decision rather than Pena?
I want to open this up to the comment section as well while we talk about it. Here's the problem, right? Like, okay, this is great question, because with Pennington, if Pennington destroys Pena, right? If she goes out there and destroys Pena, I feel like people are like, all right, like Raquel Pennington, she's our champion. But if it's a similar situation where Pennington fights Pena, where people feel like Pena won, like I feel like it hurts things even more. I just feel like this is a division people aren't, that passionate about, and now they're even less passionate about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I also would argue that if Pennington won tonight, like if she won 48-47, again, this was a close fight. Let's say it was the same fight, right? Because a lot of people thought Pennington won the fight. Let's say the decision's read and it's 48-47. Pena, 48-47 Pennington, 48-47 Pennington. Like, are people any more excited about what, the division than they are right now at this moment? Like, I would argue it's like kind of a wash, really. Like, I think Pena at least is going to make for an interesting lead up to the fight against Kayla Harrison. Like, if that fight comes together, like both of them like to talk trash. I think they're going to go jaw at each other, and it'll be a little bit better promotionally than, say, Pennington was the champion, right? So, I think that's my perspective on it. Like, I don't think that the division's hurt by Pena winning the championship back, if that's the question.
But I mean, like, because it was so many people have the question about whether or not she won the fight. I wonder as well. Let's talk about this. We got a question here from Giles Clayton. Prediction for Harrison Pena. I saw that Pena was actually talking about Amanda Nunes at the post-fight press conference. But if it is Harrison next versus Pena, how do you actually think that fight goes, man? Like, let's say that is the next fight, Aaron.
Well, based on what I saw from Kayla Harrison tonight against Ketlin Vieira, I think it'll be a close fight. Like, I don't think that it's going to be. I think Harrison will be a 3-1 favorite, probably, if I had to guess the odds. I think that she'll be favored to win that fight, and I think she certainly should be the favorite to win that fight. But I think it could very well be a competitive fight. And I thought that Juliana Pena got a pretty good game plan tonight. Like, she didn't push the agenda too much. She didn't get reckless, which is what happened in that second Nunes fight. She got reckless and kept getting dropped. I think that she fought in an opportunistic fashion where she was looking for openings, and that's, I think, ultimately was one of the keys to her having this close fight with Pennington, where she ends up getting the decision. So I do think that fight does have the potential to be a close fight. And I'm curious to see what happens. I'm also curious to see what happens with Amanda Nunes, because as soon as Harrison won, Nunes was back on Twitter. She's not on Twitter very often, or on X or whatever, with the lion and the winking emojis. And that can always shake things up a little bit. Like, if this division's starting to get a little stale already, you bring Amanda Nunes in against Kayla Harrison, and suddenly we're back in business. But I also was thinking about how this fight to me kind of signals the end of the Nunes era of women's bantamweight, because I think that every subsequent challenger that we have from here is going to be a fresh challenger. Like, we're going to have Harrison next. I think that you look at who else is coming up. You got like Macy Chiasson, you got Carol Hossa, you've got Adeline Perez just got a win last week. We're starting to see a lot of kind of new challengers that are building their way up. Norma Dumont looked great in her last fight against Aldana. Like, I think that we're kind of seeing the end of that Nunes chapter of bantamweight, and we're opening a new chapter starting like now, because I don't think that we're going to see any of the fighters who have previously fought Nunes get another kick at the can, unless Pennington maybe gets another win or two, gets herself back into the mix. But I think that the Nunes era, unless of course Nunes decides to come back, is kind of behind us now.
If Nunes came back, jumped in front of Harrison, got this fight with Pena, how would you feel about that?
I don't think she's interested in Pena. I think Nunes just wants to fight Kayla Harrison. Like, I think if Kayla Harrison ends up beating Pena, that's kind of the next move. I know Pena's been pretty vocal about wanting to get that one back against Nunes, and they're tied 1-1. But I don't think that gets Amanda Nunes out of bed in the morning. I think Amanda wants to challenge herself against Kayla Harrison, if that's a possibility.
Got a question here from MMA Voodoo. Was this a historic night for bad judging? Interesting. I don't know. Like, there are some close fights there. And also, what is going on with refs suddenly being more involved in splitting up fighters and standing them up? Are they being told to do this by the UFC? And I'm guessing MMA Voodoo is saying that because Joe Rogan did a chat with Israel Adesanya recently on his podcast. Was talking about the Herb Dean situation. And now he saw some comments from Herb Dean about how someone was kind of like insinuating to keep the fights more exciting or something. Nothing is obviously concrete in that. But what is your take? Obviously, you spoke about the judging before, but refs being more involved and being told to do this by the UFC. What is your take on it? Obviously, there's no clear evidence that that's happening, but there is a little bit more involvement lately that's been noticeable.
Yeah, and Dana White kind of spoke about this in his post-fight press conference and said that, like, he thinks that referees should use common sense, where you see a fighter that's kind of using stalling tactics and trying to stay out of striking exchanges and using grappling just to stall out their opponent rather than actually take them down or do any sort of requisite damage. Like, he would like to see referees break that up more often. I think most people would. Like, I think that third round between Bautista and Aldo tonight was a great example of that. Like, Bautista just kept going back to pushing him up against the cage and stalling the action. And like, fighters are getting rewarded for that kind of thing, where really I think that they should take away positions if the stalling is going on a little bit too much, and then if they reinitiate the stall, even less time should pass before you break that up, because that's not really in the spirit of what mixed martial arts should be. And referees are supposed to penalize timidity in fights, and that's part of what referees are supposed to do. So it's really at their discretion. They're the sole arbiter of the fights, and I would like to see referees be a little bit more trigger happy when it comes to separating fighters that are doing that. And as for the judging tonight, like, there are only one scorecard that I thought was not a great scorecard, which was giving Austin Hubbard the first round against Alexander Hernandez. Like, I thought that was a pretty clear Hernandez round. And then I would like to comment on Aldo versus Bautista round 3, but I was doing interviews during that and I didn't get to see the whole round. So you'll have to just excuse me, and I can't really give a great opinion on that because I didn't see the whole round. But from what I was seeing online, people were really upset that Bautista was just stalling that round out and not allowing Aldo to open up his offense, but also not doing any sort of damage or grappling effectively. And people didn't like that the judges gave that round to Bautista, which I understand.
Yeah, I've got a comment here from I'm honest, saying that Aldo got robbed. I know you didn't get a chance to watch that round, but what do you think is next for Aldo, man? Because it's an interesting one, right? Like, you've got a legend here in Aldo. He's coming off this loss now. He's kind of someone that everybody loves to see fight, but obviously we're coming to the end of a lot of the guys' careers on the card that we'll be speaking about throughout the show. What would you like to see next to Aldo? Because there's still a lot of big fights for him. There's so many great matchups, but at the same time, you have to pick the right ones, right? Because there's only so many more fights left for him.
Well, listen, I'm a WEC stan, and I'm begging for Aldo versus Dominic Cruz to be made. Please book Aldo versus Dominic Cruz. Let me relive the glory years of the WEC with the two best guys in the history of the WEC facing off against each other. They're in the same division now. Let's make it happen. I think that's kind of a slam dunk fight.
Yeah, I'd love that too, man. Let's quickly talk about
Aldo versus Cejudo would be an interesting one too. I think Aldo versus Henry Cejudo could be a fun fight.
I thought that if Aldo won today and had a good performance, I thought him and Sean O'Malley could have been a good fight. That would have been a lot of fun too, don't you think?
That would be fun. But I think O'Malley versus Sandhagen's the fight to make there. That to me is that's the striker's delight, and that's right there on a silver platter for you. They're serving that up. You got to do Sandhagen versus Sean O'Malley.
Yeah. And just to everybody watching, if you do have questions, chuck them in the comments. We'll do some more general questions before we wrap up towards the end with Aaron. Let's talk about Wonderboy versus Buckley, man. So Stephen Thompson, someone who's a friend of this program, he's been coming on for years. I know you've interviewed him about 1 billion times. You've been at all the big fights for him. We saw him stopped today against a very, very talented fighter in Walking Buckley. There's no shame in losing to someone like Buckley, but we can't not talk about the fact that Stephen Thompson is 42 years old. And because of his style, as you get older, obviously those reflexes get a little bit slower. And at the weight class that he's in, with the style that he has, obviously it's a quicker and more noticeable diminishment when you fight. What was your reaction when you saw him get stopped out there? And then also, what do you think the future holds for him after this one?
I'm about to say, I actually thought he looked great, especially in the first round of this fight. It's a really tough puzzle to solve, but I think that you're right. I think that at his age, he's just missing that that little twitch muscle that would allow him to be what he once was. I can see that the tactical side is still there. He's great at managing his range, and his timing is still pretty good, and his precision is still very good. But it's just where you had peak Stephen Wonderboy Thompson at a 10, we're seeing the 8 out of 10 version of Wonderboy now. And that allows him to get caught in these kind of situations where he's just a little bit slower than he used to be when it comes to stuffing takedowns, when it comes to being at the right place and not getting hit by the kind of shot that put him out in the third round today. I mean, it's only the second time he's lost by KO or TKO, but when you've got Wonderboy and he still wants to fight, I still think that he's good enough to hang with guys in the lower end of the top 15. And I think that's, or guys that are maybe on the come up that are outside of the rankings where you need him to be kind of a gatekeeper. He's not going to be a champion again. I think that he needs to put that behind him. But if he really enjoys fighting, and it seems like he still does enjoy fighting, he's still very good at fighting. Like I said, I thought, again, he won that first round today. And he did so in, I thought, very impressive fashion. I still think that there are opponents out there for Wonderboy you make fun fights with.
Yeah, dude, there's a few people out there, obviously we've got some older welterweights. You never know, Nick Diaz was looking to get back in the mix. All those sorts of fights could be fun. What about Buckley? Oh, I got someone in the comment here just saying, let's just make the Wonderboy MVP fight. That's a weird one, though, because what people don't realize is with their styles, it might not be the most exciting fight, but maybe down the track, maybe if MVP loses another one, that could be one, who knows. What do you want to do with Buckley next, though, man? Because this guy, he's fun in interviews. He's got a personality. He's got this great win over Wonderboy. Not many people are able to do that to Wonderboy, so this really puts him up in a lot of fans' minds. This is, for a lot of people, like a huge thing now for him. He's a bit more, I suppose this stoppage is really sort of going to get him a little bit more fanfare. What would you like to do with him next? Obviously, it's not Conor McGregor.
No, well, he wants to fight Kamaru Usman, and I don't mind that fight, but personally, I think that a better one would be if he's still looking to continue his career is Gilbert Burns. Like, I think Gilbert Burns versus Joaquin Buckley would be a really interesting stylistic matchup. I don't think that Buckley presents the same sort of threats that Sean Brady did for Burns in that last fight. And I think that, if Gilbert Burns can get into some grappling exchanges with Buckley, he could find some success. And even on the feet, I think he can hang with Joaquin Buckley. So that's what I would, I think that would be a logical next matchup for both those guys.
We got someone in the section asking about what's next for Colby Covington, and he's someone in the division that needs a fresh matchup. Do you think like a Colby Covington-Buckley fight could be a good one?
Colby Covington is not signing to fight Buckley. Like, that's the thing. Colby Covington right now is being very selective as to who he wants to fight. And like, he recognizes, I think, that he's only got a couple fights left in his career, and he wants to maybe make one last title run if he possibly can. But, I think that right now he is waiting for the right opponent, whether it's a good stylistic matchup for him or it's somebody that's going to get him back into the title picture. And I don't think he's going to want to fight these younger guys. He's not going to want to fight like a Sean Brady. He's not going to want to fight like a Buckley. I think that it's going to be a big question mark as to like what the right opponent for him is that he's actually going to sign to fight. And I don't mind him being strategic. Like, I think older fighters should be a little bit more strategic in the later part of their career to, like, if they are still having championship aspirations, like, you need to be very careful with who you're going to be fighting.
Yeah, I know that, Covington comes on this show a lot and he's like a friend of the program, and his last performance wasn't the best because he was injured, but I am excited to see him come back at 100% to see what he can still do. So I agree with you. Why waste matchups? So we were talking about this earlier with Aldo, like, you want to maximize these matchups for these fighters so you can get a few fun ones before they go. What about Jorge Masvidal, man? While we're on the welterweight division, what do you want to do with him next? Because I was actually thinking of doing like a rematch Wonderboy if Wonderboy won. But now that that's kind of out of the books, do you still want to see this Leon Edwards fight? Do you use Masvidal in another way if he comes back? How do you think is the best way? What do you think is the best way to do with
Leon Edwards is
Masvidal?
Leon Edwards.
Leon Edwards?
You need to give Leon Edwards an interesting opponent, because I think that once he dropped the title to Bilal, like, he's completely faded into obscurity. Nobody's talking about Leon Edwards right now. Like, nobody's calling him out. Nobody's talking about who he's going to be fighting next. Like, Masvidal wants to come back in 2025. Like, if you want Leon Edwards to, like, not disappear, like, put him against Masvidal, give him a name, right? Like, I think that's probably what you want to do. That there's built-in history there. They probably were wanting to make that fight for some time, and it's just like things never fell into place, and guys were losing and other guys were winning, and I think that's the fight to make.
Because I mean, the other question I was going to ask you is, Kamaru Usman, obviously Buckley wanted him, but ideally, who do you? Because the welterweight division's actually quite interesting right now. We got Shavkat. I think Shavkat should get the title shot. You agree with me, Aaron? Shavkat versus Bilal?
Yeah, 100%.
Hopefully in December. All right. So, what would you do with Kamaru? We've also got JDM, Aussie JDM there in the rankings too. We've got Ian Gary as well. Now Buckley's in the mix. How would you sort of book this if it was up to you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's kind of a good problem to have because there are a lot of good contenders right now. I think Usman needs to decide if he wants to move up to middleweight or if he wants to stay at welterweight. It seems like he wants to stay at welterweight, in which case, yeah, like, I don't really know who would be a good matchup for Usman, because I think Usman's got to be put into a spot where not necessarily favorable matchmaking, but I'd like to see what he still has left, right? Like, I feel like we didn't really get that from his most recent matchup. Like the Khamzat fight, he was fighting at 85. Like, I feel like we didn't really get to see what he's got left in the tank. And then the second Edwards fight, he just did not look good in that fight. So I don't really know who you could match him up against with that would be that sort of a situation where you can see kind of what he has left. I just like Sean Brady might be interesting to see how he would do against a guy like Sean Brady, who's more of a grappling focused fighter. Like, that could be an interesting fight.
Yeah, that would be real good. Yeah, welterweight is packed right now, and everybody is so
Yeah, and
talented, man.
nobody's matched up either, right? Like, so there's a lot of different options out there
I just
to
the only
explore, and I
thing
think that's a
the
good
only
problem to have.
Yeah, the only thing for me is you can't give Kamaru this title shot with Bilal. Like I know
I
that
agree with you.
Kamaru has the name value. I know that, these guys have a bit of a beef, like a fake beef that, Bilal's building, but it's gotta be Shavkat next. Let's make that happen. Let's quickly talk about Carla Esparza, man, because she's a bit of a legend, isn't she? She's had a really historic career, a great run when it comes to MMA, and today was the end for her. It's kind of crazy. Like for you and me, I'm not sure. When did you start covering MMA? What year was it? I'm trying to remember.
This was actually my 100th numbered event that I've been covering
Oh, no way. You
UFC.
and John Anik
UFC,
both
yeah,
sharing
yeah,
an
both of us.
anniversary.
UFC 208 was his first one that he called, and UFC 208 was the first one that I was kind of sent to on my own as a reporter. So, like, kind of a cool milestone there. So I guess that would have been 2017.
Yeah, yeah, awesome, man. Yeah, and I was sort of a little bit before that, but yeah, Esparza was popping up. Obviously, she's a champ. She's someone who was able to really dominate even outside of the UFC before she came in. How do you look back at her legacy now that it's all said and done today at UFC 307?
I think she's a Hall of Famer, two-time champion, the longest duration between title reigns. And even though she never defended the title on either occasion, I still think that, like, as a pioneer of the sport, somebody who was the first ever champion of a division, and then again, all that time passes and she ends up winning it back again. Like, I think that those are Hall of Fame credentials. And this was the first time she ever lost by unanimous decision in her career, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's been a really strong career for her, and she's beaten the likes of like Alexa Grasso. She has like a lot of good names on her resume. She's beaten, Angela Hill, Michelle Watterson. Like in her last fights, I think she finished her career 6-2 in her last 8, and she was an underdog in all but 2 of those fights. Like, and she won. Like, she just kept overcoming the odds and winning. So, like, I think she's had a really strong career overall, like a Hall of Fame career. Like I said, I think that's you should do right by her, and she should be inducted into the Hall of Fame.
I agree with you, man. What a historic run. It was cool to see her bring her kid out. And yeah, great to see her have the week. Unfortunately, didn't finish the way that she wanted, but it was still a great career nevertheless. All right, as we wrap up, man, a few fan questions. A little bit unrelated here, but a little bit related, I suppose, to the card. Khalil versus Hill next year. Do you like that matchup? Do you think that's the one to go with?
Yes, that is absolutely the one to go with. Great nomination there. Your listeners are educated fans of. I mean, I know this because the submission radio is awesome, and anybody who watches the show knows knows the sport inside and out, and knows the right content to watch in this space. So shout out to whoever. That's the fight to make. Agreed.
Just quickly as well, what fight are you looking forward to the most next? Because we've got UFC 308 around the corner, right? A couple of huge matchups there, but a few fun fights as well right around the corner. Obviously, John Jones is almost here with Stipe. What are you looking forward to the most? Do you have like 2 or 3 fights that really stand out to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, Jones and Stipe definitely is one that stands out to me just for like historic purposes. Like, I know a lot of people are lamenting that it's not Jones versus Aspinall, but like, I kind of do see the perspective where, like, that fight was booked last year. Jones gets injured. Why should Stipe forego that fight? Like, I mean, you could say, hey, maybe Stipe should have fought Aspinall or something in between so we get some, like, some closure on this division. But, like, I don't think that Stipe wants to fight anybody but John Jones. And, he is, I think, the greatest heavyweight in UFC history. And I don't think it's really a conversation. So, yeah, I think this is a fun fight. I'm excited to see how it plays out. I'm excited to see what Stipe has left, really, because we haven't seen Stipe in quite some time. I don't think he even has a win over anybody who's on the UFC roster right now. Like, it's been a minute. So I'm curious to see what he still has left in the tank. And, John Jones, what we saw against Cyril Gane was spectacular, but it also didn't last very long. So I kind of want to see how John will do if Stipe does rise to the occasion and test him.
You think John Jones sticks around, or you think this is it for him?
No, I think this is it. I'd be surprised if he sticks around. Like, I just don't see why. Like, people will be upset in the moment, but when you look back at it historically, like, he's the greatest of all time, right? Like, I don't think that he wants to risk that part of his legacy. And another fight, by the way, like Petr Yan versus Figueiredo is a sneaky good fight that they just announced recently that I'm really looking forward to as well.
And obviously the Hamzat Robert Whitaker fight, that's going to be very interesting as
Yes.
well. Make sure that hopefully that still happens. Do you think Stipe
Yes.
retires as well? If you goes out there and beats John Jones, do you think Stipe retires as well?
I would say so, but I'm curious, like, who's less likely to retire with a win, Jones or Stipe? Because I'm not convinced that, like, if Stipe beats
I
John
think
Jones,
Stipe
like,
is less likely to retire, right? Like, I feel like
yeah, I don't
Stipe
think people are really
would
talking
be
about that.
keen.
Yeah, I
A
don't think people
Stipe
are talking about that
Aspinall.
much.
No one's really talking about Stipe Aspinall, are they?
No, not at all. People are writing Stipe off like this is a foregone conclusion, forgetting that Stipe is like the greatest heavyweight of all time and can actually probably make some noise in this fight.
All right, man. Well, listen, I appreciate you joining me for this wrap up, and I appreciate everybody tuning in. Of course, everybody can check out Aaron's amazing work, of course, on Sportsnet, but follow the man on social media at Aaron Bronsteter. Dude, I always love all your breakdowns. I love the fact that, you know what I love about your Instagram and what I love about your Twitter especially is you'll do those little recaps of the press conferences. It's just so genius, man. I love how you sort of break things down for people and you make it easy for them to access it. But of course, also your coverage is incredible. Thank you for all the amazing stuff that you do, man. Thanks for joining me here today. I know it's late over there.
My pleasure. Hey, can I shoot you some trivia before we go? I noticed today that Yasmin Lucindo and I share a birthday, and I was 20 when she was born, so I'm an old head. I'm 42, so I want to give you some trivia here. Who are the two active UFC fighters who are older than me? Like I said, I'm 42 years old. Two active UFC fighters who are older than me. I asked Caroline Pierce this earlier.
Oh, two active UFC fighters. They're older than you. Well, it's got to be like Wonderboy, right?
No, Wonderboy's 41. He's younger than me.
Oh, I thought he was 42. Okay.
No, he's 41.
Stipe?
No, younger.
Ah. Jeez, I don't even know. Who is it?
You want divisions? You want to shoot you divisions? One's kind of a giveaway.
Divisions. Give me a.
All right, women's bantamweight. That should be an easy one.
Holly Holm.
Holly Holm. Ding, ding, ding. That's one. Yes. The other one is lightweight, and I'll give you another clue about lightweight. It's not Jim Miller, but it's a lightweight. Jim Miller's also younger than old Bronsteter. And he's fighting soon.
It's not Nick Diaz?
No.
No.
Well, actually, Nick Diaz is probably older than me, I would guess.
Yeah, let's have a look.
He's an active fighter.
Nick Diaz.
How old is Nick Diaz?
Let's have a look. He's 41, so he's close. He's close, he's younger, but he's not. Younger. Yeah. Who is it? Guida.
Clay Guida. Yeah, there you go. You got it.
No, I got to give this guy.
Racket. All right. Yeah, he probably looked it up because I put you on the spot, and yeah, I know you're not the cheating type, but Racket knocks it out of the park. Clay Guida, the carpenter, fighting young Chase Hooper in his next fight.
How are you 42? You got to break down your beauty routine on the next one. But dude, I appreciate you joining me. Congratulations on another huge event and 100 events in to 100 more, man. Can't wait to see what's next for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. Yeah, if I'm breaking down my beauty routine, it'll be a shorter interview than this one. So looking forward to that one. But I always appreciate you having me on. Happy to do it. And yeah, I hope everybody subscribes to Submission Radio because you guys do